Hey there, welcome back to our Revolution Games Academy. In our previous tutorial, we've learned about creating settings menus. In our previous tutorial, we've learned about creating settings menus. In this tutorial, we will be creating a mini map from scratch, integrate it into our game, and even add a player icon to make it more interactive. A mini-map is a small, real-time view of the game world that helps players navigate, find objectives, and stay aware of their surroundings. Before we start building our mini-map, let's make sure we have a scene ready. For this example, we need two things, a player and a game world. If you don't have them yet, don't worry. You can use simple placeholders like cubes for the player and terrain for the world. In our scenario, we have created a 3D race game. Now let's add the minimap camera. This camera will be responsible for capturing a top-down view of the world. To do that, head over to the hierarchy panel, right-click, and select Camera. This will create a new camera that we will use for the minimap. Set the X rotation to 90 degrees and make sure the Y and Z rotations are set to 0 degrees. This will adjust the camera's rotation to make it look straight down at the world. Next, let's position the camera above the world. For this, adjust the camera position such that it's high up above the terrain. Don't forget to disable the audio listener on this camera so it doesn't interfere with your main camera's audio. To make sure the mini-map looks good, we'll change the camera's projection to orthographic. This means that objects won't get smaller as they move further from the camera, which is what we want for the map. Adjust the size to control how much of the world the camera captures. You can also adjust the minimap camera's transform position if needed. Now, we'll be working with something called a render texture. A rendered texture in Unity allows you to capture the output of a camera and store it as a texture. This is really useful for things like mini-maps, security cameras, or any other system where you want to render what a camera sees onto a texture that you can use in your UI or materials. To create one, right-click in the Assets panel, go to Create Render Texture, and rename it. Now, let's assign the minimap texture to our minimap camera. Select the camera, and in the inspector, find the target texture field. Drag the render texture we just created into that field. Now, whatever the camera sees will be rendered to that texture. Let's move on to displaying the minimap in the UI. Right-click in the hierarchy and select UI Raw Image. This will automatically create a canvas under which the raw image game object that holds the minimap texture will be created. Now go to the raw image component in the inspector and assign the minimap texture to the texture field, which you have already created. Resize it and position it in the corner of the screen. Make sure to press Alt and select the top right option in the anchor preset to properly position the minimap in the corner of the screen. Now let's make our minimap interactive by adding a player icon. You can import a 2D icon like a circle that will represent the player on the minimap. You can create one or import this from royalty-free sites. If you have an image asset, you can convert it to a sprite by selecting it, then going to the inspector window and changing the texture type to sprite. Next, create a new image by selecting UI Image. Set the source image to the icon you imported and resize it to fit your requirements. In our scenario, we make the main camera a child of the player object and position it just behind the player. This way, the camera moves along with the player, keeping the right perspective. Next, align the player icon to the center of the minimap. This can be done by making it a child of the raw image and aligning its rect transform to the center position. Now we have to create a script to manage the camera's position to follow the player in the minimap. Once created, double-click to open it. Start by declaring two public variables, player and minimap camera. the player will store the reference to the player's transform, and the minimap camera will store the reference to the camera that will show the minimap. Next, declare a private variable called fixed height. This variable will hold the y-coordinate value for the camera, ensuring it remains fixed at a certain height above the player. In the start method, which runs when the script is initialized, assign the fixed height variable to the current Y position of the minimap camera. This allows you to set the height of the camera once and keep it consistent. Inside the update method, which runs every frame, call the update minimap camera position function. This function will be responsible for updating the camera's position. In the update minimap camera position method, calculate the desired position for the minimap camera. Use the player's X and Z position to track their movement in the world. Set the Y coordinate to fixed height to maintain the same camera height. Now, update the minimap camera's position by setting its transform.position to the new position you calculated. To make sure the camera always faces the right direction, we set the camera's rotation to be directly above the player, keeping it in a top-down view. With this setup, the minimap camera will follow the player's movement while keeping the player centered in the minimap view, and the camera will always maintain the fixed height above the player. Now, drag and drop the completed script onto the minimap camera. Then, in the inspector window, assign the player's transform and the minimap camera reference to their respective fields. You can save the scene and test the setup to ensure everything is working correctly. You will notice that the player icon stays at the center of the minimap, while the minimap camera moves relative to the player's position, updating the raw image accordingly. Now we can finally add a border to our minimap. To do this, create an image inside the canvas, resize it as needed, and position it in the corner of your screen. Make sure to add the raw image as a child of the newly created border image. Then adjust its rect transform to position it at the center of the border image. You can do this by holding Alt and selecting the center preset in the anchor presets to position it in the center. Finally, test your entire setup by clicking the play button. Great job! You've now created a fully functional minimap for your Unity game. You learned how to set up a minimap camera, create a render texture, display it using the UI, and update the minimap camera with respect to the player's position. If you found this guide helpful, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing for more Unity tutorials. In our next video, we will be designing responsive UI for mobile games. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.